Hi everybody, welcome to Spectrum Economics. Today we're going to be looking at my Dark Side series, and so far we've covered off on a number of different topics. We had an overview, a general overview of some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. I looked at taxation and how that's being used, or how it's being used to manipulate us. I looked at the healthcare system. I've also taken a look as well at democracy. That's sort of now become part of my Dark Side series in terms of the sort of darker twist I think I ended up putting on it. But today we're going to be looking at the dark side of war. So how does economics apply to war, and how is war sort of being used in a way to push certain agendas? So when I talk about war, I'm going to talk about it in terms of three areas. First of all, there's the threat of war. So that is to create an impression, that there's a war coming soon, or, there's a lot of countries out there that have very different values from us and are a threat to us, are culturally different. In that sense, whether it's a direct economic war, it could be an actual violent physical war, and so on. But it's basically the threat of a potential war and why that's used. Then of course there's an actual war, an actual conflict that takes place, and there are actually many conflicts going around the world at the moment. You might say some of them small, not on the same kind of scale as maybe your World War I and World War II, but there's still a reasonable amount of conflict in the world. Some of it we hear about, some of it we don't hear about. Then also, as well, there's what comes after the war, and that's actually quite significant as well in terms of the whole reconstruction progress or redevelopment of countries that basically have been destroyed because of the war. And we see that all the time, places getting completely bombed to bits. And then, companies come in and there's a whole reconstruction business that goes on afterwards. Okay, so let's start on the threat of war. So what do we mean by the threat of war? So as you see a lot in the news these days, well, it's almost always in the news, not even just these days, it's been going for several years now. There's always some form of threat of war, whether it's a war with another country, so you could be talking about another world war with Russia, or it could be with China, or at the moment they're pushing, North Korea now. Then there's the wars in the Middle East, there could be Syria, and then there's been Egypt, and then there has been Afghanistan, Iraq, and a few other ones. So, and like I said, there's a lot of threats in terms of, the wars actually coming to our doorstep. So even these wars are actually raging on in other countries. And the bigger threats, of course, being those with the nuclear power. That would be, countries like North Korea and countries like China and Russia, and that's always something that keeps people on the edge. So why is that necessarily done? Well, it's what we call fear-mongering, and when people are afraid, they're more likely to give in to certain things that they wouldn't necessarily. Like you really, lose certain freedom. Because you're afraid, you're more like, okay, for example, surveillance, for example. People would be strongly opposed to surveillance if they thought it wasn't necessary. They thought, well, why are the government spying on us? There'd be plenty of opposition to that. But the fact now that we have all these terrorist attacks and stuff like that, the threat of that, you can actually put in the surveillance. A lot of people are supporting it. Though, as many of us who are more awake know that a lot of this terrorist activity, in one way or another, leads back to the government anyway. Especially when you look at what's been released regards to September 11th and involvement in that and all of the stuff going behind that. But there's a lot of people that believe that there's just people that pop up out there that then just hate the Western world and just attack us. But that's not necessarily the case. But anyway, this fear-mongering is considered necessary in terms of people giving up their freedoms. If people are afraid, they will give up their freedoms. And that's where the government comes in, and they can put a lot more things, a lot more restriction in terms of what we do. And also, it gives them the right to hire more police, armed police, have them on the streets. Like, I'm here in Brisbane, and I have a Caboolture train station, and every so often you actually have armed police actually at those train stations. I have no idea why. I think it's absurd, but apparently you'd be pushing the agenda that you need these armed police to protect us. Protect us from who, I'm not too sure. Even with the attacks that happened in London, you put plenty of armed police on the streets and stuff like that. It's not going to stop something blowing up or whatever, So it's again, people that are afraid, so therefore they're going to give in to the government, and they can put more people, like armed soldiers, like we saw. What did we see now? I think it's in London. It's sort of been going backwards and forwards, hasn't it? As martial law, kind of like a martial law with the armed soldiers on the streets and all that. And the thing is, people would say that was awful, but because of all these things that are happening and the fear-mongering behind that, people are actually willing to support that because, well, a lot of people deep down inside don't think their government would be supporting terrorism. And it's a sad thing, but the reality is, that's just what happens, isn't it, you know? All these arms and weapons are going out to these countries, going through Saudi Arabia, who are then supporting their own ISIS and all that with their Wahhabism and all that sort of thing. So, anyway, let's now get to actual war. And hopefully that can be held off for as long as possible. I know that actual war is going on at the moment, but in terms of a world war, for example, you know, we haven't had a world war since World War II. So you're going all the way back to what's ended, 1945 and all that. So that's, you know, well over, was it 70 years? 70 years since? Yeah. So that's a long, long time. But we've had lots and lots of other wars. Some of the reasonably big wars as well that have been a little bit removed from Western society. So we don't really see the full extent of what's happened in those countries. But actual war in itself, again, people will be willing to give up their freedoms because of war, because of the terror of war, and because of the loss of life, and a massive loss of life if you look at World War I and World War II. Let's take, for example, as well what they achieved through having this World War I and World War II. Like at the end of World War I, they came up with what the League of Nations. So again, you can see there's a sort of centralizing control of power. And after World War II, you had the United Nations. Again, that's another thing where you're bringing a lot of countries together to form something that's becoming closer to a world government. It seems like it's quite a long way away, but if you look at like the European Union as well, for example, I think that was formed back in the 1970s, and that's sort of grown bigger and bigger, especially with the arrival of the euro and all that, and that whole relationship. And it's great that Britain have actually broken from that now. But again, it's a centralization of power. And if you have wars and all that, once the war is ended, people are afraid because they don't want to see it happen again, because wars are terrible, they're devastating, and millions of people lose their lives. Property is damaged, your homes are lost, families are broken up, it's terrible. So people don't want this war, so they pretty much do anything to avoid it. And when governments throw in these solutions, and people have a natural tendency to trust government, and then they get implemented, like I said, with the United Nations and stuff like that, European Union things. Also, what happens after the war as well, this is an opportunity, and this is where the economics comes in, to rebuild. And what happens there, you've got banks loaning money to countries so they can rebuild. You've got construction companies coming in and they're rebuilding these countries. And you're rebuilding the infrastructure. You might be rebuilding the hospitals that are destroyed, the schools that are destroyed, airports that are destroyed, roads, all of that housing and all of that. All has to be rebuilt to cater for the people that have survived the war. And there's a lot of money that can be made from that. Lots and lots of money can be made from that. And who are the people that are benefiting? It's obviously not the people that had their homes destroyed. It's obviously not the countries either, because, well, they end up in a huge amount of debt because they've got to borrow lots and lots of money to rebuild their countries. So basically it comes back to the elite and the rich are the people that actually benefit out of these. Those that own the construction companies, those that own the banks, that are lending the money and getting the interest on it. They're the big winners out of this reconstruction from the war. Okay, so that takes me to the end of this video. Again, I just want to do a quick recap. I looked at war in terms of 3 phases. First of all would be the threat of war, the fear-mongering that goes behind that, which helps government maintain control. Then there's the actual war itself, which in a sense you have ultimate control, in the sense that basically it becomes, you get martial law within the countries and people basically lose all freedom whatsoever. So that is very, very powerful. And also war in itself can actually cover up, I didn't mention that earlier, other things that may be going on within the country as well. So you maybe have wars overseas and there could be big announcements about an attack on Syria, for example, that might be covering up certain issues that are going on at home that don't make the headlines that might should be. Like they could be passing a policy and something like that that people don't hear about. And then the last step would be after the war has happened. So we get all these new organizations. You've got a call for global government to end all potential future conflicts, and also we get all these big construction deals where countries need to rebuild and borrow money. So that takes us to the 3 phases. And unfortunately for us, war as well, I say unfortunately, it's a reality. War for almost everybody is very, very bad, unless of course there's money to be made, and which there almost always is. And generally those people that are able to make the money, they generally tend to be quite safe. They're hidden well out of the action. I like, hiding in bunkers and stuff. I've heard that there's been some preparation where some powerful people, business owners, we call it the 1%ers, the elite, let's say, and they've got like homes in New Zealand and all of that. So that's somewhere where they keep themselves safe, so they're kind of always out of the conflict, but then again they cash in once the war is over in terms of lending money and construction. Okay, so that takes me to the end of this video. If you like this video, please click the like button. If you want to see more of my dark side videos, kindly subscribe. Like I said, I've got a few others. I've got one on health, one on taxation. Also got a number of other series going as well. I always do something on cost-benefit analysis now and again. I've got my microeconomics. I've also got my vegan economics stuff as well. And at the moment, I'm writing a book still. It's slowly getting there, and I'm going to be putting some of my chapters up on YouTube as well. Say chapters, well, summaries of the chapters anyway, just to give you an update of how that's progressing. So that's all quite interesting stuff anyway. Like I said, if you like that kind of thing, remember to hit the subscribe button, and that takes me to the end of today's video. Thank you for watching.